So, welcome to another deep dive, coming to you from Echoes from the Edge with the Lone Wolf. And for this one, I actually want you to take a second and just think back to a specific memory.
Oh, we're starting with a visualization.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, just a quick one. I want you to try and recall a long drive from years ago.
Okay.
Like maybe you were in the passenger seat as a kid, or, maybe it was one of your very first road trips behind the wheel.
Right.
It's high summer, the windows might be rolled down a bit, you've got the radio on, and you are just flying down a rural two-lane highway.
Classic summer road trip vibes.
Exactly. But here's the specific thing I want you to picture. I want you to picture the windshield.
Oh, man. I know exactly where this is going.
Right. If you really think back to that time, you'll remember the constant, just subtle movement outside, the way butterflies, moths, and just 1,000 unidentified flying insects would, sort of drift across your line of sight.
It was almost like a slow motion snowstorm sometimes.
Yeah. Yes, a summer snowstorm. And you'd hear the active, living hum of the air outside, but it was always punctuated by the constant...
The thwack.
Exactly, bugs just constantly hitting the glass. And by the time you reached your destination, or honestly, even just the next gas station, that windshield was an absolute mess.
It's completely covered.
It was covered in the thick, undeniable evidence of life. Like, you physically had to get out with the squeegee at the gas station just to be able to see the road again.
Yeah, anyone who grew up driving even just a few decades ago has that visceral memory banked away.
It was just a given.
Totally. The squeegee was a mandatory tool for any road trip. The sheer density of insect biomass in the air was an absolute given.
Right.
You drove a long distance, you intersected with millions of tiny lives.
And it was a chore, sure, having to clean it, but it was a chore that essentially proved you were moving through a living, breathing space.
Well put, yeah.
Now, I want you to take that memory and compare it to a drive today.
It's a stark contrast.
It really is. You can drive for 6 hours down those exact same rural highways, cutting through what looks like miles and miles of lush green fields, and what happens?
Nothing.
Nothing. The windshield remains completely eerily clean.
Yeah.
The air outside is entirely still. There is this profound, unsettling stillness to the landscape now.
And that contrast, right? The spotless glass, the missing hum, that is exactly what we are plunging into today.
That is the whole mission of today's deep dive. Today, we are looking at a stack of brilliant ecological essays that all attempt to explain this exact quiet erosion of the natural world.
Yeah, it's a really remarkable collection of observations we've got to go through.
It is. We're looking at sources like the fragility of forest efficiency, the quiet erosion of presence, the signal of the silent fields, and wild intelligence.
And what's fascinating is that they all circle the same, almost invisible phenomenon, but they tackle it from slightly different scientific and psychological angles.
Right. So we're going to unpack the mechanics of that silence. We're going to look at why our societal obsession with this concept of quote-unquote efficiency is actually creating a catastrophic kind of fragility in our soil.
And our food webs, too.
Yeah, our entire food web. And we are going to explore how we can retrain our eyes to spot the invisible signals of a weakening ecosystem before it's, entirely too late.
I think setting the parameters for this discussion is really important right up front.
Definitely.
Because the goal of examining these sources isn't to induce environmental panic or, preach doom and gloom.
No, not at all.
The objective here is to practice rigorous critical thinking. The texts point out that the most profound systemic changes in our world, the ones that truly alter the biological fabric of our reality, they almost never announce themselves with blaring sirens.
Right, they don't make the evening news.
Exactly. They arrive as a quiet absence. They arrive as a clean windshield.
Which is such a creepy way to think about it, but it's so true. And if our brains are hardwired to ignore this slow drain of life, I feel like we have to start by looking at the psychology of perception.
Oh, absolutely. The cognitive side of this is huge.
Because we are talking about this windshield phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
We are losing staggering amounts of insect biomass and bird populations globally.
Massive amounts.
And if things are disappearing at such a massive continental scale, I just keep wondering why there wasn't a singular moment where everyone collectively stopped and said, wait, where did the moths go?
Right. Like, why wasn't there a panic?
Yeah. Why didn't we notice the silence settling in?
Well, the author of the essay, The Quiet Erosion of Presence, digs deep into this exact cognitive blind spot.
Okay, let's unpack this. What do they say?
So, the human brain is an incredible filtering machine, obviously. but it has very specific evolutionary limitations.
Right, it can only process so much data at once.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And crucially, we are conditioned to react to kinetic, immediate threats.
Like a tiger in the bushes.
A predator jumping out of the brush, a sudden drop in temperature, a fire sweeping across the plains. These things trigger the amygdala immediately.
They flood the system with cortisol.
Exactly. You get that adrenaline spike.
Yeah.
But we are fundamentally not wired to register a gradual compounding absence.
Wow. So because nothing is actively attacking us, our brains just sort of shrug it off?
Pretty much. If the threat doesn't have a definitive starting gun, we simply adapt our baseline to accommodate the new reality.
It's the slow leak in the tire rather than the blowout.
That's a great way to put it.
And if I think about how we process our daily environments, it completely makes sense. We walk outside, the sun is shining, the grass is green, so we just check the everything is fine box in our brains.
Right, because visually it doesn't look like an apocalypse.
Yeah. And one of the texts, The Signal of the Silent Fields, describes this acoustic shift so brilliantly.
Oh, the acoustic data part of that essay is fascinating.
It really is. It details how there used to be this subtle, pervasive hum-like, an intricate network of unseen acoustic activity in literally every single patch of wild grass.
Just this constant background noise of life.
Exactly, it was the background radiation of existence. But now, that acoustic signature is largely gone. It's been replaced by a stillness that the text describes as feeling, quote, incomplete.
And that acoustic data is actually a perfect representation of the biological data.
How so?
Well, when scientists talk about the loss of the hum, they aren't just talking about it being quieter. They're talking about a massive drop in biodiversity.
Right, fewer bugs means less noise.
But the danger the text highlights isn't just the physical disappearance of the ecosystem. The deeper, more insidious danger is the psychological recalibration.
We just adjust to the silence.
We do. We accept it as the new normal.
Which gets really, really deceptive when we extrapolate this to the modern landscapes we drive past every single day.
Oh, the monoculture fields.
Yes. If you drive past a massive 3,000-acre monoculture field of soybeans or corn, it registers to the eye as spectacular.
It's perfectly uniform.
It is perfectly uniform. It is brilliantly green. To the untrained eye, glancing out the window at 70 miles per hour, that field looks like the absolute pinnacle of health and abundance.
Because the visual cortex sees green and assumes thriving biology.
Exactly. But the sources draw a massive distinction here, right, between biomass and biodiversity.
A huge distinction. A sprawling monoculture field is essentially a green desert.
A green desert. That's such a heavy phrase.
It's accurate, though. I mean, it contains an enormous amount of biological matter, the crops themselves, but it entirely lacks the dynamic, interconnected web of life that actually defines a functioning ecosystem.
There's no variety.
None. There are no varied root structures supporting different fungal communities down in the soil.
Yeah.
There are no varied canopy heights for different bird species to nest in. There are no year-round pollen sources for the bees.
It is a biological factory floor, painted green. It's just a facade.
That's exactly what it is.
The imagery in the text, The Silence of the Air, breaks this down to a micro level really well. The author specifically recalls the sheer movement that used to exist over agricultural land.
The butterfly quote, right?
Yeah. They write about how butterflies used to cross fields, quote, like drifting thoughts, and how solitary bees and wasps weaved through the air with purpose.
Like every cubic foot of air felt occupied by something living.
Yes, and then they contrast that living memory with the modern reality of these empty stretches, like long drives where literally nothing intersects your path.
And because that emptiness doesn't directly threaten our immediate survival, like we talked about with the amygdala, it doesn't demand our attention.
It just becomes the new backdrop of our lives.
Exactly.
You know, I was thinking about this perceptual failure, and I keep coming back to a mechanical analogy.
Let's hear it.
I call it the dimming light bulb scenario.
Okay, the dimming light bulb.
Yeah. Imagine you are sitting in your living room and you're reading a novel, and the smart bulb in your lamp is programmed to dim by exactly 0.1% every single day.
So a tiny, tiny amount.
Microscopic. Because the daily delta is so small, your pupils adjust continuously.
Yeah.
You never consciously register the drop in lumens from Tuesday to Wednesday.
That your eyes just compensate.
Exactly. You just keep reading. It's only like 2 years later when you actually try to read the fine print in a contract that you realize you are straining your eyes in a room that is basically pitch dark.
That is a terrifyingly accurate analogy.
Are we just sitting in the dark right now, looking around at these silent fields, fully believing the lighting is fine?
We absolutely are. The dimming light bulb concept is exactly what environmental scientists refer to as shifting baselines or generational amnesia.
Shifting baselines.
Yeah. The physical equivalent is that we are operating in an ecosystem that has lost massive percentages of its foundational insect and avian life over the last 50 years.
So the room is way darker than it used to be.
We are sitting in a room that is significantly darker than it was in, say, 1970. But because our neurological pupils dilated slowly along the way, we genuinely believe the room is still fully illuminated.
Man, if our baseline is that compromised, if we can finally force ourselves to look at the light meter and realize the windshield is clean and the room is dark, we have to confront the mechanism behind the loss.
We have to ask why.
Right. Why is the bulb dimming? And the sources make a really hard pivot here. They pull us away from staring at the symptom, which is the silence, and they force us to examine the disease.
And the disease, according to these texts, is our total systemic devotion to forced efficiency.
Forced efficiency. The essays, The Fragility of Forced Efficiency and The Silent Erosion of Biological Infrastructure, tackle the agronomic history head-on, don't they?
They do. They argue that this quieting of the world is not some tragic, unforeseen accident of climate change or some mysterious plague.
It's not just bad luck.
Not at all. It is structural. It is the direct mathematical result of how we redesigned our land management post-World War II.
This is where I think we need to elevate the conversation beyond just saying monoculture is bad, because it's deeper than that.
Way deeper.
The texts point out that for the last 70 years, our entire approach to the natural world has prioritized one metric above literally everything else: yield per acre through forced simplification.
Simplification is the key word there. We demanded perfectly predictable harvests, absolute land optimization, and the total eradication of variables.
We basically tried to turn farming into an assembly line.
We did.
Yeah.
And we need to look at the mechanics of how that simplification actually works down in the soil.
Okay, let's get into the dirt.
Following the Green Revolution, we shifted to massive-scale monocultures, which means planting a single genetic strain of a crop over thousands and thousands of acres.
Right, miles of just one type of corn.
Exactly. Now, from a short-term economic perspective, this is genius.
Because it's easy to manage.
Right. You only need one type of machinery to harvest it and one specific chemical protocol to treat it. But agronomically, biologically, it is devastating.
Why is it so devastating to the soil specifically?
Because when you plant only one crop, you only have one depth of root system.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Those roots pull very specific nutrients from one exact stratum of the soil year after year after year.
So you are basically mining that one specific layer of dirt to the point of total exhaustion.
Precisely. It's the exact opposite of a wild prairie.
What does a prairie do differently?
Well, a healthy prairie has shallow-rooted grasses, it has medium-rooted shrubs, and it has deep taproot flowers.
So they're all pulling from different levels.
They are pulling from and contributing to different soil layers. But when you mine that single layer in a monoculture, the diverse microbial life in the soil just starves.
The microbes die off.
And without those microbes and varied roots to hold the soil structure together, the soil literally collapses. It compacts.
And once the soil compacts, it gets like concrete, right?
Exactly like concrete.
Which means it can't hold water.
Nope. The rain just runs right off, taking the topsoil with it.
So then the farmer has to bring in massive heavy machinery to aggressively till and rip the soil open every season just to get the seeds in the ground.
Which, of course, further destroys any surviving microbial networks.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is. The cycle compounds. Because the soil is now functionally dead and lacks any natural nutrients, you are forced to inject synthetic petroleum-based fertilizers.
Most of which originate from the Haber-Bosch process, right?
Yes, exactly. You have to inject these chemicals just to keep the crops alive.
So we have taken a self-sustaining biological engine and turned it into a patient on permanent, incredibly expensive life support.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And yet we call the resulting high yields progress.
Right. But the text aggressively challenges this. It argues that replacing a self-regulating ecosystem with a chemically dependent factory floor is actually massive reduction.
It's the illusion of progress covering up the reality of reduction.
Okay, wait. I want to push back on the author's framing here, or at least play devil's advocate for a minute.
Go for it.
Because the concept of efficiency is treated as an absolute virtue in almost every other aspect of human life.
Sure, yeah.
Think about everyday logistics. When I spend a Saturday organizing my garage, I drag all the old broken junk out to the curb. I throw away the empty boxes. I put my tools in labeled bins.
A very satisfying Saturday.
Very satisfying. And I optimize the floor space so I can actually park my car inside. My garage becomes more streamlined, more predictable, and therefore vastly better.
Hard to argue with that.
So why is optimizing a 1,000-acre field suddenly deemed fragile? What makes biological efficiency so incredibly dangerous compared to spatial or mechanical efficiency?
Okay, the garage analogy actually perfectly encapsulates the cultural misunderstanding these essays are trying to dismantle.
Okay, how so?
The fundamental flaw lies in how we define junk.
Junk!
Yeah. In your garage, the broken chair and the empty cardboard boxes are inert. They consume space, but they provide no structural value to the room.
Right, they're just in the way.
Removing them improves the function of the room. But when we apply that exact same mechanical logic to a living ecosystem, we completely misidentify the components.
What do you mean?
We look at an agricultural field, and we declare the corn is the product, therefore the native weeds, the beetles, and the field mice are the junk.
Ah.
So we spray the weeds with herbicides, we nuke the insects with insecticides, and we optimize the physical space entirely for the corn.
We literally treat the native ecosystem like the broken chair in the garage. We just sweep it out.
Exactly. But in biology, the junk isn't junk. The junk is the engine.
Wow.
The text, The Silent Erosion of Biological Infrastructure, introduces a concept that completely reorients this thinking.
What's the concept?
It argues that ecosystems are infinitely complex networks, and the elements we deem useless or messy, like the pollinators, the parasitic wasps, the untidy patches of milkweed, they are not optional aesthetic components.
They aren't just background decorations.
No, they are, quote, foundational infrastructure.
Foundational infrastructure. You know that phrase, biological infrastructure? It completely stopped me in my tracks when I was reading the source material.
It's a powerful reframing.
It really is. Because when we hear the word infrastructure, our brains immediately go to concrete, steel, civic engineering.
Roads, bridges.
Yeah, we think of suspension bridges, the national power grid, subterranean aqueducts, things built by human hands to carry a massive load.
Right.
To apply that weighty, load-bearing concept to a bumblebee or a patch of wild clover, it fundamentally shifts how you view the landscape.
The linguistic shift is brilliant because it forces us to recognize utility in what we previously considered chaos.
Yes.
If we accept that these insects and native plants are infrastructure, your garage analogy falls apart. You have to replace it with a structural analogy.
Okay, like what?
You wouldn't look at the Golden Gate Bridge and say, you know, there are an awful lot of steel cables here. It looks very cluttered and messy.
Right, let's clean this up.
To make this bridge more visually efficient and streamlined, let's sever 40% of the cables.
You'd be thrown in prison for catastrophic sabotage. The bridge would tear itself apart under its own weight.
Exactly. Because you intuitively understand that the cables aren't decorative. They are distributing the tension. They are load-bearing.
So the text is arguing that in the natural world, biological diversity is the load-bearing structure.
Yes. When you remove diversity to achieve visual or operational efficiency, the entire network loses its tensile strength.
I read that section and immediately thought of it like playing a high-stakes game of ecological Jenga.
Oh, I like that. Ecological Jenga.
Yeah. As a society, we are sitting at the table aggressively pulling out the wooden blocks that we mistakenly think are waste.
Right, the weeds, the bugs.
We pull out the messy brush at the edge of the farm, we pull out the dandelion, we pull out the aphid. We want to make the tower look sleeker, cleaner, more efficient.
We want a perfect tower of corn.
Exactly. So we pull out block after block, and the tower is swaying, but it's still standing, so we arrogantly pat ourselves on the back and think, see, we didn't need that block. We are managing this perfectly.
But eventually.
Eventually, inevitably, you pull out the one specific load-bearing block that brings the entire tower crashing down.
The Jenga visualization captures the hubris of it perfectly. But unlike a tower of dead wooden blocks, biological infrastructure is deeply interwoven through trophic cascades.
Trophic cascades. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. The sources detail exactly how this weakening happens, and it's never just one block falling, it's a domino effect.
Right.
Think about the mechanics of modern farming we just talked about. First, a farm sprays herbicides to eliminate the wild, messy edges of fields and the native weeds.
Because weeds compete with the crops.
Right, so getting rid of them seems like a good efficiency move. But that weed was actually the primary food source and breeding ground for a specific type of microwasp.
Uh-oh. So the wasp population crashes.
The wasp population absolutely crashes. Now, it turns out that specific microwasp was the natural apex predator for a type of aphid that loves to eat the cash crop.
Oh, man. So without the wasp to keep them in check, the aphid population just explodes exponentially.
Exactly. You remove the biological infrastructure that managed the aphids for free.
So now the farmer has to come in with an insecticide to kill the aphids because they just eliminated the natural predator.
Right. But here is the mechanism of the pesticide treadmill. Insects reproduce incredibly fast.
Right, multiple generations in a single summer.
So a small percentage of those aphids will have a random genetic mutation that makes them naturally resistant to the chemical spray.
Survival of the fittest.
The spray kills 99% of the aphids, but the 1% that survive breed rapidly. Within a few seasons, you have a massive population of chemical-resistant aphids.
So the farmer has to use a harsher chemical.
They have to use a harsher chemical or spray more frequently,
Yeah.
and that harsher chemical then drifts on the wind and kills the local bee populations,
Which reduces the pollination rates of the surrounding landscape.
which causes native wildflowers to die off, which starves the local bird populations, and on and on.
It's a terrifying compounding loop.
It really is.
We are systematically cutting the suspension cables on the bridge and then spending billions of dollars on synthetic glue trying to hold the concrete together.
That is exactly what we're doing. And the texts emphasize that life thrives in layered ecosystems. Every single layer supports something else.
All right, it's all connected.
The deep roots support the microbes cycle nitrogen for the plant feeds the insect feeds the bird guano fertilizes the soil.
And when you collapse all those layers into a single monoculture plane,
The system shatters.
and this brings us to what I think is the crux of the psychological crisis.
The shifting baselines again.
Yes. If the biological infrastructure is crumbling, if the bridge is swaying, and the soil is on life support, why isn't this dominating the nightly news?
Why aren't we freaking out?
Right. Why isn't there widespread global panic? The sources transition us here from the physical agronomic loss out in the fields to the neurological danger happening inside our own heads.
Which goes back to the dimming light bulb.
Exactly. But the text, the quiet erosion of presence, frames it with a chilling clarity. It reiterates that reduction, by its very nature, is incredibly hard for the human animal to track.
Because it's slow.
Because it's slow. If half the songbirds in your neighborhood dropped dead out of the sky on a Tuesday afternoon, people would riot.
The government would launch an immediate investigation. It would be front-page news.
But if 2% of the songbirds fail to return from migration every year for 25 years, nobody marches in the streets. We just, buy smaller bird feeders.
The ultimate existential danger outlined in the text is the speed at which human memory overwrites the past to normalize the present.
Overrates the past.
Yeah. The phenomenon of shifting baselines means that our internal measuring stick for what constitutes a healthy environment is completely unmoored from historical reality.
It's just floating.
It is tethered only to our own formative experiences.
So if I think about that generationally, the implications are absolutely devastating.
How so?
Does that mean my kids are literally incapable of seeing the environmental damage I see simply because they never witnessed the original state? Is that how shifting baselines actually function in practice?
That is the precise mechanism. Let's return to the windshield example to map this out generationally.
Okay, let's track a single family.
Consider a grandparent who learned to drive in the late 1960s. For them, a normal summer drive meant navigating air thick with moths, beetles, and monarch butterflies.
The squeegee generation.
Exactly. So to their neurological baseline, the current reality of a spotless windshield after a 4-hour drive is deeply alarming.
Right.
It feels objectively empty to them. It registers as a profound loss.
But then you have their child, let's say someone who started driving in the late 1990s.
To the driver from the 90s, the baseline had already shifted significantly downward. They remember having to clean the windshield occasionally, maybe after driving through an agricultural valley at dusk, but they don't remember thick swarms.
So today's clean windshield seems a bit sterile to them, perhaps slightly odd, but it doesn't trigger a crisis response.
Right, it's not a glaring absence. And then we get to the teenager getting their driver's license today.
Oh, wow.
To the 16-year-old today, a perfectly pristine windshield after a long drive through the country is their day one baseline.
It is their definition of normal.
Exactly. If you try to explain to them that the air used to be thick with millions of insects, it sounds like an exaggeration or just a messy annoyance from the past.
They cannot mourn the absence of the insects because they have absolutely no lived experience of the ecosystem that supported them.
If you grow up surrounded by still air, you don't miss the hum.
The quote from The Signal of the Silent Fields that really hammered this home for me states, quote, "There was a time when silence meant peace, not absence."
That is such a profound line.
It really is. Like, to a modern listener, a stressed out commuter stepping out of their car into a vast, utterly quiet field of soybeans might feel a rush of relief.
It feels like a relaxing escape from the chaotic noise of the city.
Yes, it feels like peace. But to a farmer or a naturalist from a century ago, that exact same acoustic void wouldn't be peaceful.
No, it would sound like a graveyard.
It forces us to ask an incredibly uncomfortable question. How do we properly advocate for the health of our world if our cultural memory is constantly shrinking?
That's the million-dollar question. If every subsequent generation accepts a more degraded, chemically dependent, quieter world as the natural state of things, the political and social urgency to protect the environment just evaporates.
You cannot fight to restore an ecosystem you don't even know is missing.
Right. It's the ultimate vanishing act.
The ecosystem disappears physically, and then the memory of the ecosystem disappears psychologically.
And if that memory is gone, the motivation to overhaul our systems of forced efficiency just dies on the vine. We just keep managing the decline, thinking we are maintaining the status quo.
Which is why these historical and ecological texts are so absolutely vital. They act as a hard anchor against the shifting tide of our own amnesia.
They are trying to forcefully remind us that the silence is a symptom of structural failure, not a natural state of tranquility.
But then, if we've completely lost our baseline, how do we even begin to reconstruct a functional system?
That is the pivot we need to make.
Because we can't just uninvent modern agriculture and go back to the 1800s. We still have to feed 8 billion people.
Right. Starvation isn't a solution.
So how do we shift our approach? This is where the final text, Wild Intelligence, the Philosophy of Non-Intervention, takes a massive paradigm-shifting swing at our entire modern worldview.
It's a heavy essay.
It doesn't just offer new farming techniques, it offers a totally different lens for human existence.
It requires a radical departure from the mechanistic command and control mindset we've utilized since the Industrial Revolution.
The garage organizing mindset.
Exactly. The core premise of that text is bracingly simple, yet incredibly difficult for modern optimization-obsessed societies to accept. It states, nature doesn't need improvement. It needs space.
It needs space, not vastly superior chemical engineering.
Right.
Not GPS-guided drones that micro-target pesticide drops. Not genetically modified seeds that can survive in dead soil. Just space to operate.
The author argues that when left alone, ecosystems do not devolve into meaningless, unproductive chaos, which is the great fear of our management-obsessed culture.
We are so afraid of chaos.
We are. But instead, they rapidly achieve a dynamic, highly productive equilibrium. Life within a natural system adjusts, it responds to chemical and biological threats, and it evolves in real time.
And the text uses a very specific, loaded phrase to describe this overarching process. They call it emergent intelligence.
Emergent intelligence, yes.
I want to dig deep into that phrase because vocabulary really matters here. When people hear the word intelligence today, they immediately think of artificial intelligence.
Or human intelligence.
Right. They think of large language models, programmed code, silicon chips, or at the very least, human cognitive brain power. But the text explicitly says this biological intelligence is not artificial, not programmed.
Right.
So if it isn't a central brain running the show, what exactly is emergent wild intelligence, mechanically speaking?
Think of it as millions of years of evolutionary problem solving operating as a decentralized network.
Decentralized?
Yes. The best way to understand emergent intelligence is to look beneath the soil at the mycorrhizal networks, which are often referred to as the Wood Wide Web.
The Wood Wide Web. I love that.
It's so accurate. In a healthy, unmanaged forest, the fungal networks completely intertwine with the root systems of all the trees. These fungi act as an underground internet and circulatory system.
Okay, so they connect everything.
Completely. If a tree in one area of the forest is in deep shade and lacks sunlight for photosynthesis, the fungal network will literally transport carbon and nutrients from a tree in the sun across the forest floor to the shaded tree.
Wait, really? The fungi act like a supply chain?
Yes, it redistributes resources based on need, without any central management telling it to do so.
That is mind-blowing.
It gets crazier. If an aphid infestation attacks a tree on the edge of the forest, that tree will send chemical distress signals down into its roots and into the fungal network.
It sends an alert.
An alert. The surrounding trees receive that signal and immediately begin pumping bitter defensive tannins into their own leaves before the aphids even reach them.
Wow, so they preemptively defend themselves because the network warned them.
Exactly. No single organism is in charge or running a management spreadsheet, yet the system as a whole exhibits staggering resilience, communication, and adaptability.
The intelligence emerges from the billions of localized interactions happening constantly.
That is emergent wild intelligence.
It's the ultimate decentralized supercomputer, and it has millions of years of successful R&D behind it.
Millions of years.
And then, as the text points out, humans walk in with our clipboards and our tractors.
And our herbicides.
The text says, quote, "When we intervene, when we reshape landscapes to fit human expectations, we disrupt that intelligence. We replace living systems with managed ones."
We look at this ancient, infinitely complex biological supercomputer, and we arrogantly assume we can run the logistics better with a 5-year corporate management plan.
It is the pinnacle of human hubris. We try to out-engineer millions of years of survival data using synthetic chemicals and brute force.
And the source makes a vital philosophical distinction here. It states that management is not the same as harmony.
We have conflated those two words for a century, haven't we?
We really have. We look at a perfectly managed, straight-road, weed-free, chemically sterilized field of corn, and we call it in harmony. But it's actually in a state of strict subjugation.
It's on life support.
Harmony, as the text defines it, inherently allows for variation. It accepts unpredictability. It understands that a resilient system requires redundancy and messiness.
Accepting unpredictability seems completely anathema to the modern supply chain mindset. To look at a landscape and say, we don't know exactly what this field will yield this year because we are allowing the ecosystem to share the space and self-regulate.
It's a huge leap of faith for a modern farmer.
But we are actually seeing this philosophy put into practice now, right? It's not just theoretical. What does it practically mean on a societal level to give nature space and allow for this wild intelligence to operate alongside human needs?
Well, we are seeing incredible, tangible results in the fields of agroecology and rewilding.
Let's talk about rewilding first.
The most famous example of trusting wild intelligence is the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park in the 1990s.
Oh, this is a classic example of trophic cascades.
The ultimate example. For decades, park managers tried to artificially control the elk populations because they were overgrazing the riverbanks, causing massive erosion.
Because they had no natural predators.
Right, human management was failing. So they brought back a native apex predator, the wolf.
And it triggered a massive cascade.
It did. The wolves didn't just eat the elk, they changed the elk's behavior. The elk stopped lazily grazing in the open river valleys because they were vulnerable there, and they moved into the timber.
Which took the pressure off the rivers.
Exactly. Because the elk moved, the willow and aspen trees along the riverbanks immediately bounced back. Because the trees grew back, the beavers returned to build dams.
Wow.
The dams created micropools, which brought back the amphibians and the fish. The reinforced riverbanks stopped eroding, physically changing the course of the rivers.
The rivers literally changed course because of the wolves.
That is emergent wild intelligence. One biological input self-corrected the entire landscape in ways human engineers couldn't possibly model or artificially replicate.
And we can apply that exact same trust to agriculture.
We can, and some people are.
Yeah, I was reading about farms that are abandoning monoculture entirely and shifting to layered ecosystems, like alley cropping or agroforestry.
Agroforestry is a perfect example of stepping back and letting the network function.
Right. Instead of clearing 1,000 acres for just wheat, they plant rows of native nut trees. And under the trees, they plant fruit shrubs. And between the rows, they plant the wheat. And they let livestock graze the native weeds in the understory.
It's mimicking the layers of a wild ecosystem.
And the results of those layered systems are astounding.
They are. The trees provide windbreaks that stop topsoil erosion. Their deep roots pull up water and share it through the fungal networks.
The native weeds provide the biological infrastructure for the micro-wasps, so the farmer doesn't need chemical pesticides.
The livestock provide natural fertilizer, eliminating the need for synthetic nitrogen.
It's brilliant. Now, the yield per acre of just the wheat might be slightly lower than a monoculture, right?
Yes, the single crop yield is lower, But the total caloric and economic yield of the nuts, fruit, wheat, and livestock combined is often higher.
More importantly, the system is robust. If a drought hits, the deep-rooted trees survive. The system has built-in shock absorbers.
It's resilient, not fragile, but it requires us to completely relinquish our addiction to total visual and operational control.
Practically, it means embracing what our garage-organizing brains currently view as messiness.
We have to let it be a little messy.
It means allowing the borders of our massive agricultural fields to grow completely wild with native brush to support the pollinators. On a micro level, it means rethinking our obsession with manicured, chemically treated, sterile suburban lawns.
Oh, the suburban lawn is the ultimate green desert.
It really is. It means accepting that a truly healthy, thriving landscape might look a little chaotic to an eye that has been trained on geometric perfection.
We have to learn to tolerate the perceived junk in the garage, realizing it's actually the foundation of the house.
This shift in perspective, honestly, is the ultimate goal of this deep dive. The reduction of life we are seeing on our windshields isn't merely an environmental crisis. It is a profound philosophical crisis.
It reflects a fundamentally flawed worldview, viewing the planet as an inert, mechanical object to be optimized and controlled, rather than a living, intelligent system to coexist with.
As the author concludes, that core perspective dictates our survival. If you view the world as an object, you extract from it until it breaks. If you view it as a living system, you figure out how to participate in it.
You participate in it, you become a node in the network, rather than the manager standing on the catwalk looking down.
Man, we've covered incredible, deeply vital ground in this deep dive. We started with that visceral, nostalgic memory of the bugs on the windshield, the active, living hum of the summer air that we all used to know.
The squeegee memory.
Right. And we break down the agronomy of how our relentless drive for forced efficiency, our desire for monoculture, chemical dependency, and total control is literally stripping away the structural biological infrastructure of our world. We are mining the soil and cutting the cables on the bridge.
And we also explore the insidious, quiet psychological danger of shifting baselines. We examine how easily human perception adapts to generational amnesia.
Allowing us to get used to the silence.
Right, sitting in a dimming room and redefining the darkness as perfectly normal.
And finally, we looked at the awe-inspiring reality of emergent wild intelligence. The idea that nature, with its mycorrhizal networks and trophic cascades, doesn't need our micromanagement.
It just needs the space to breathe.
It needs space to self-correct and to be wildly, messily, unpredictably alive.
Exactly.
For you listening to this right now, the goal of this deep dive isn't to leave you feeling overwhelmed or defeated by the silence. The goal is that this knowledge fundamentally rewires how you interact with the physical world tomorrow.
You can't unsee it once you know.
You really can't. The next time you are driving down a rural highway or standing at the edge of a massive, perfectly uniform crop field, or even just looking at a manicured suburban lawn, you won't just see the green that is there.
Your eyes are now trained to actively, critically notice the biology that is missing.
You have the light meter now.
To leave you with a final thought to mull over, drawn from the logic of everything we've explored today. The next time you step outside on a beautiful, clear afternoon and you find yourself enjoying the perfect, undisturbed silence of a pristine park or an endless green field,
Take a deep breath.
take a deep breath and ask yourself a hard question. Are you truly experiencing the peace of nature? Or are you just listening to an ecosystem that has been silenced?
That is a question that will absolutely stay with me, and I hope it stays with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep critically questioning the world around you, and we'll see you out there.
Keep your eyes open.